All right, thank you for that. The next, we have our agenda adoption. I'm aware of 3 items that have been requested to be pulled. Item F, policy 7406. I, policy 4334, the drone policy. And then the facility usage fee items. So J, I, and F. I would recommend putting those after the after-school fee increase, if that is acceptable to everybody.
It's fine with me.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Jay. Okay, and then the other item is second closed session after those items as well. If that is acceptable, we would need a motion to approve agenda with those amendments.
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion from Sarah,
Second,
second from Bonnie. All right, Ms. Dole.
Yes.
Okay, Ms. Purcell. She on. Ms. Purcell, can you hear us? Are you on mute?
I don't see her in the attendee list yet.
Okay. Okay, she's texted and she's saying she's having an issue. Okay, I'll show her as not voting. Dr. Moore,
Yes.
Ms. Hauser,
yes.
Mr. Richmond,
Yes.
Ms. Smiley,
Yes.
and chair votes yes. Agenda is approved. All right, so we'll move to our first action item. The first one up is the landscaping and mowing. So
We need to move to approve the consent agenda first.
oh, I'm sorry. You're right, Sarah. Sorry, I was looking at the motion. Okay, can we get a motion to approve the consent?
So moved.
Second. I have a motion from Ms. Smiley, a second from Ms. Dole. Okay, Dr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Richmond,
Yes.
Ms. Smiley,
Yes.
Ms. Hauser.
Yes,
Is Ms. Purcell joined? I do not see her.
She's there.
Ms. Purcell? Approval of consent?
Yes.
All right. And the chair votes yes. All right. All right. Moving down to the landscaping and mowing and herbicide treatment contract services, 2023 through 2026.
Okay, I'll go ahead and jump in. Good evening to Dr. Felder, Superintendent, members of the board. This is a contract that we had planned to bring before you this evening for the landscaping and herbicide treatment of school campuses. We were delayed in getting our formal bid posted. And so what we're asking at this time is a 60-day extension for our current contractor, Murray's Landscaping, to continue services through August 31st. This will allow staff time to complete the formal bidding process for landscape services and give the contractors time to visit the sites in July to assess the bid proposal and submit bids, and then we would bring it back to the board for approval in August. We are currently in a contract with Murray's Landscape Services through June 30th of this year, and that's the purpose of this agenda item this evening.
All right. Do we have any questions? Okay, if there are none, we do need a motion.
Motion to approve.
All right, we have Sarah with the motion. Do we have a second?
second,
Okay, Ms. Hauser. Okay, let's see, Ms. Purcell.
Yes.
Okay, Ms. Smiley,
Yes.
Ms. Doyle,
Yes.
Ms. Hauser,
yes,
Dr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Richmond,
Yes.
and chair votes yes. Motion carries. Thank you all. Okay, next item is the water fountain improvements and upgrades, capital funding.
Yeah, so this project was during the pandemic, maintenance staff had started the process of putting bottle fillers onto the water fountains and upgrading water fountains within the district. This project is to ensure that we continue that efforts, and rather than piecemealing and installing water fountains on a new water fountains or upgraded water fountains on an intermittent basis, to go ahead and complete the requested units, and that's 64 units to be installed at the school. So there's at least one on every hallway and one in every cafeteria for all of our buildings. These would be the same brand that was previously installed. It was formally bid on 2 occasions. 2 plumbing companies submitted bids, and Brown Brothers was the low bidder. The total cost of the project is $236,785. We do have the funding within the capital investment plan, and we do have Hank McKee, our Assistant Director of Maintenance, and Patrick Florence, our Director of Capital Projects and Construction, if there are any questions from the board regarding this project.
Any questions from any board members?
I have a
Carrie?
brief question. Yeah, I'm just curious with, thank you, with, I don't want to make this complicated or ask for more detail, but knowing that, like Eflin, for example, is going to have hopefully the mobile units, are some of the places that are currently overcrowding or having to accommodate extra students going to have adequate services of that nature?
So with the mobile units, those will have restroom facilities in them. I'll need to double check the specifications on the water fountains in those locations. But typically the mobile units, if they don't have a water fountain, then there would be a water bottle filling station that would be added or could be added to the project. And I'm just not familiar with the water connections on that project. So I'd need to get that question answered. But either way, the students would have water accessibility for drinking within the mobile units as well.
Thank you.
All right. No other questions. I do have one comment that I am glad to see we're promoting reusable methods for water and others versus consumables of water bottles, because I do know in the past we've asked PTAs to donate water bottles and such to students. I think this is a great change and outlook for us. All right, do we get a motion to approve?
And may I ask if the motion be approved contingent on attorney review and approval of contract non-monetary terms and conditions? It's in the abstract. We don't have a contract yet.
Yes, so moved, contingent on attorney approval, as the attorney stated.
second,
Okay, we have a motion from Ms. Smiley and a second from Ms. Hauser. Let's see, Mr. Richmond,
Yes.
Dr. Moore,
Yes.
Ms. Doyle,
Yes.
Ms. Hauser,
yes,
Ms. Purcell,
Yes.
Ms. Smiley,
Yes.
and chair votes yes. All right, thank you so much. The next item is the contract for the site renovations for mobile units at Eflin Cheeks Global Elementary.
Yes, so this is in reference to the mobile unit installation at Eflin Cheeks Elementary School, scheduled to have 10 classrooms added with ADA accessible restrooms as well. This is one mobile unit configuration on the campus in accordance with General Statute 115C-521. Mobile unit construction and erection on school campuses must follow all general, state, and local guidelines, the same such as would be for building construction, brick and mortar buildings, whether that's new buildings or renovated buildings. And then in addition to that, not only does it require the same standards, but the temporary structures must also comply with all building code requirements and other legal requirements. That includes things such as plumbing, mechanical, electrical, making sure that the shop drawings are stamped and approved, and also that the North Carolina Department of Insurance and North Carolina Department of Instruction review and approve the building and to be installed and added. And part of that process is ensuring that the site is available and accessible to the buildings being completed. So we have a contract with Aries Building Systems for the mobile units. And so this contract is for the site plan and the site renovations, which are certainly much more extensive than was anticipated when we talked about this project and approved the Aries contract for the lease of the mobile units back in December. This required, as part of our contracts with Corley Redfoot Architects, for them to do a site plan and a site assessment. The contract for this was signed on February 7th. They began immediately with the site assessment and the site work. There was a survey that was completed of the site in March of 2023. And again, the project was submitted to planning and inspections, and then the formal bid was put out in in March. And then part of the issue was we weren't anticipating the project coming back at this extensive with the amount. And so it was rebid and reposted because the current low bid that we have on the project from the bid received is $533,000, which puts it into the formal range. And so there was an extensive amount of assessment, site plans, and work that Corley Redfoot did. I can talk more about the project, but for this this abstract and this is for the site work to be completed. It does have underground electrical and water being expanded from the building to the mobile units, and then the sewer connections is an actual separate sewer line dedicated from the mobile units outside the building, so that there's not any additional issues with sewer plumbing issues within the building by running the sewage back through the building and then back out to the main taps. So again, an extensive amount. When we look at site plans and we look at building plans, part of what was looked at was how the mobile units were installed and set up for the geothermal project at Orange High School. But in that case, we already had an existing construction project that was already scheduled and taking place. And we had a parking lot that was already available to be used to set the mobile units. In this case, we're actually utilizing part of the campus that has not been graded or set up for mobile units to be set on, and that requires a tremendous amount of site work and foundation work, et cetera, to be done, which is well beyond what the original scope was when staff reviewed the project. The bottom line is we're glad that we have Corley Redfoot Architects and Design as part of the project, because uncovering and discovering how extensive this is critical and necessary for the safety of the students and for the occupants within the buildings, and to make sure that all general statutes and guidelines are being followed. So this evening, we're bringing before you the contract for this to take place, for the site work, the anticipated completion date, where we would issue with your approval this evening a notice to proceed tomorrow. And we've asked that the site work be completed substantial completion on or before July 15th. So that allows the mobile unit company 30 days to install the mobile units once the site work is completed and set. And we know the contractor was working on their surveys, and then they're working on their submission for the building or for the construction permits to do the site work at this time with the county. Questions about the
All right, I see Ms. Smiley hands up. Go ahead, Ms. Smiley.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a huge amount of money for a temporary project, I mean, I'm going to vote to approve this or whatever, but like the question I have is, with all of this additional water and sewer and all of these things, like, is there any long-term value to us here? I mean, once we do redistricting, hopefully we'll right size the student body and we won't need all of this. But like, is all of this just sort of, we're paying it for this temporary solution, or is there any long-term value potentially to us?
There is long-term value. What I said to staff internally with for construction and looking at future facilities, because you will have foundations and you'll have an area that's already been graded and the services, like you mentioned, already there at the end of the lease and the mobile units, I would not recommend certainly continuing extending mobile units on a site campus. One, for safety reasons, and two, it's a value of an asset that's continually going to go down. And so the cost of continuing to operate mobile units gets more expensive. What you could, what the board should consider would be conversion of that area to a either a prefabricated building or designing a metal building or some type of expanded building project that would be, anywhere from a 25 to a 50-year building could easily be put back in that location. There are designs and plans similar to that on campuses throughout the state. And so certainly I would take advantage of that. Long term, we know the mobile units are being installed for construction and to assist with some capacity for 2 of the rooms. But long term, we still know that the core capacity areas like the cafeteria, et cetera, there needs to be additional core areas on the campus. And so having a building there would allow, any of the number of things, whether it's cafeteria expansion, whether it's building facilities, additional classrooms, et cetera, that could go back in that location. Certainly mobile units, because of the square footage, run anywhere from around 800 square feet. Most classrooms are 1,200 square feet. So obviously, if you have 10 mobile units, you're not going to build something to get 10 classrooms in the same spot, but you might be able to get 4 or 6 classrooms in that location. But that would be my recommendation. We certainly take advantage and evaluate, and we can have Corley Redfoot follow back up on that as to what that site survey may say that the board may have options to do at the end of the lease agreement.
Thank you.
All right, other questions? Ms. Hauser? You're on mute.
First, in response to that point, just reminding the board that at the end of this year, we will have the full facility study from the county, which will have our plans for expanding or renovating or replacing facilities. So those kinds of topics should be covered there. This, as I understand, these mobile units are there 5 years for the engineering project on the HVAC project, as well as adding capacity to a school that urgently needs it. And I went back, as you might imagine, I'm a little bit unhappy that this is coming to us so late. And when did we first realize that this was so much bigger than we originally thought?
Probably in April, once the design was done and the project went out to bid.
So why didn't this come to us then?
So let me again back up. I'm happy to give you a timeline. So again, Corley Redfoot started the assessments in February. Site surveys were done in March. The project plans were completed in April. They were submitted to planning and inspections in the county on April 3rd. We also had to go to the state. The state provided comments back on May 23rd. We responded back on May 24th. Orange County Stormwater provided comments and approved on May 16th. Orange County Planning completed their review on June 6th. The Fire Marshal completed review on May 11th. Erosion Control approved on May 16th. Building inspections completed reviews again on June 6th. We're waiting on the Health Department. Solid Waste Management completed on May 18th. So again, it's hard to bring something to you until we know exactly the full scope of exactly what's going to be required or the additional work to be done. And so once we had all of that completed, we had that packet in hand on May 22nd. It could not make the May board meeting. Would have been happy to put it on last Friday. So we're bringing it to you as quickly as we could once we were able to review all the documentation for this project. Again, also keep in mind, we've had staff changes as well. And, we're still responding to DPI. The part of the issue with this is, I want to go back to what was mentioned all the way back in December. We said the goal, our intent was to have the mobile units on site and in place in May. And at that point in time, in March, that's correct. And we also said we didn't anticipate at that time any substantial issues with the project or any delays, certainly if there were no delays in the project. And we also pointed out at that time that the project still requires, and this is in the abstract from December 12th, this project still requires site survey, zoning, and permitting from Orange County, electrical and plumbing connections, and review by the Department of Public Construction and final inspection. And as staff, we're not architects and engineers. We can't sign off on drawings and site plans and submit any of the things I've mentioned to Orange County Planning, to the Department of Public Construction, the Department of Insurance, or put out formal bid packages that aren't signed and stamped. And so that's the work that we've been doing.
I understand. And then in April, at the end of April, when we applied for the class size waiver to DPI, we also reassured them that these mobile units would be in place for the start of the school year.
And that's still the goal. And we're on that timeline now. We're again, as I mentioned earlier, our goal is notice to proceed, have the site assessments and the site work completed by July 15th, have the mobile units on place by August 14th, and the delivery of the furniture that week, so that the mobile units are in place, as we stated, for the start of the 23-24 school year.
So to the teachers, is there any time in that schedule? Because I know the teachers are all packed up now.
I'm not sure who's packed up, because again, we have a phasing plan for construction. And until that plan is coordinated, I'm not sure any teachers have been told or indicated who should be moving at this point in time, because it's based on construction.
Okay, well, you might want to talk to the principal.
We have the principal invited to the construction meeting, and that means next week. So again, I'm just trying to not get into weeds down with the termites, but I just want to make sure we're answering that the goal still is the mobile units to be installed and ready for use by the start of the 23-24 school year, which is what we indicated.
So Patrick, when a project is this late, it's not right now, we need it on a very short leash because there's no room for delays anymore. And the question is, so with your schedule, where is the time for the teachers to move into the new space and get ready for the start of the school year?
That would occur again the week of August 14th to 18th, based on those teachers that are designated to move on the construction schedule. So
I thought you said the furniture was coming that week.
It will, and as soon as the furniture is in, we can move. If the furniture is not in or there's a delay, they have furniture in existing classrooms right now that can be moved.
Okay, I guess
furniture should not be a delay to teachers being able to get into classrooms. Again, if the new furniture is not there, we can move the furniture that they currently have in their classrooms on campus.
Okay. I think it's a little tight. I was curious, who is overseeing all this?
So the project is coordinated a couple different ways. Corley Redfoot is overseeing all of the design, the specifications, and the site work. Aries Building is overseeing the mobile units that'll be on site in the construction of those. Patrick Florence on our team is the Director of Capital and Construction Projects, will be the project coordinator, is the project coordinator. If there's issues or things with contracts or anything like that, then I or Dwayne would handle those with the board attorney or the parties that need to be involved with any contracting. But the actual site work as project director, like any construction project, would be our designated district project coordinator, which is Patrick Florence.
So
And
is
again, once
Patrick the go-to? So who is going to let the board know if there's any delays, if there's any action that's needed? Because there's no room for delays at this point, right?
So as with any projects, the chief operations officer, which we have an interim now with Dwayne, or Patrick, would keep the superintendent and the board informed of the project. Once we received that the lease agreement for the mobile units was approved by the Board of County Commissioners last week, we immediately had a scheduled conference call with all the parties involved, which included the building manufacturer for the mobile units. It included Corley Redfoot, it included our staff. We have project meetings scheduled for this week, following if you approve the site plan this evening, which will include, in addition to those individuals, the contractor for this construction site work to be done. And then again, we've invited the principal to be part of those weekly meetings as well, or when they're scheduled, to review the project. And that's what we do on our weekly or bi-weekly construction meetings as we have project dates and times that are scheduled.
Right, but this is not your following process. I'm asking that we have, and I don't know if Patrick Florence can take that. I think Dwayne has way too many responsibilities. I don't know if Corley Redfoot should offer a project manager, but I would like to have one person who is accountable for this project as a priority above everything else. And so I don't know who that should be, but
we don't have a single person who doesn't have other jobs and other projects being completed. We have a number. Corley Redfoot has 18 projects right now for the school board.
I understand all that.
Working on. There's not a single person on the team. Now, we certainly could recommend hiring someone else, but that process will take a while. We don't have a single person whose only job can be the mobile unit project for Eflin Cheeks Elementary School.
Well, I want one person who is accountable for all the pieces. If whether or not that's their only job is, I don't know if that's necessary, but I really believe we need, if we want this project to happen in this very, very tight time frame with many failure points, then we need one person over it and not fitting and doing it as a priority. Now, it doesn't
Again,
mean
this project has been a priority. And as all the things I've mentioned, this is why we didn't get the landscape and mowing contract on the street and work on that bid. This project has consumed, and it is the priority project that we continually are working on to make sure that those mobile units are on site.
And if I can just insert, I appreciate the discussion. Just want to be clear that this does not mean that there can't be future delays. And so I think we should be clear about that. I mean, certainly we are not anticipating, we hope none occur, but it is possible that there could be a delay. And I just want to elevate that.
and that's why it needs to be on a tight leash, because if there is a delay, then
Ms.
we.
Hauser, it is on a tight leash, as Patrick just outlined for you. But I'm saying, no matter how tight the leash is, there can still be delays.
Yes, there's just, what I'm hearing is we don't have one person that's accountable for it. We have many different people that are accountable, and they're going to fit it in their priorities. And my experience says that this project to get done, it's 2 months It is not very much time, and we will have a higher likelihood of being successful if we have one project, one person overseeing all the pieces and responsible for overseeing for all the pieces.
And we wish we can do that. And to Patrick's point, there's no one in this district that has one job. And I'm sorry, that's just not how it works. Unless we're willing to hire someone just for this work.
And keep in mind with facilities, construction, and maintenance, every day we operate, whether it's during the school day or it's during the summer months. When we're in operations and there are emergencies or there are critical things, that is the priority, regardless of the other jobs assigned or any other projects. We have to respond to what those building and facility emergencies are, regardless of all the other construction or all the other projects that are scheduled, including getting ready for the next school year. And this project is part of that. It is a priority, and it is a project. It is a very big project. When we talked about the original timeline, we were talking about approximately 90 days. We are at 60 days, but again, there has been workmen going on this project since February. And so there has been 4 months. I don't want to leave the public or anyone with the impression that the staff hasn't done anything since we talked about this in December, because that's what we feel like we're hearing, is this hasn't been a priority and the staff hasn't been making this work take place. I'm telling you, there are critical legal responsibilities, and we have ensured that we meet those.
All right, I see it differently. I'll let others speak.
Will, are you calling on people, or how are we doing this here?
Yeah, I was gonna call. I saw Patrick had his hand up. Dr.
Yeah,
Thorne?
let me add to what Patrick has said as well. At the inception of this project, we set up weekly meetings with Corley Redfoot, and we review this and the other 12 projects that I'm over right now each week. And we have interim meetings as major items come up. And as Patrick saw today, I forwarded him a timeline, and we're getting updates by the hour. DH Ward, the civil contractor, is literally ready to put yellow steel on the ground, and will as quickly as he gets his notice to proceed tomorrow. And at that point, it truly is a fluid project. Is going to move as fast as we possibly can make those things happen. So this project is getting weekly and sometimes daily attention to make sure it's on track.
All right.
That's-
Thank you, Mr. Florence. Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say that, well, first, appreciation to Mr. Florence and Mr. Obley and the team for all of the extensive work that has happened on this project. From my perspective, it sure seems like Mr. Florence is the point person overseeing and accountable for this. He's the director of construction and capital projects. This isn't his only project, but he's the point person spearheading it and coordinating the different parties who are also responsible for their pieces of it. So I guess I'm just not seeing that isn't the case when they're having such frequent meetings, moving it all forward. And ultimately, he's our head of construction and capital projects. So,
Sarah, I agree with that. I think that's what it sounds like to me. I mean, I'm looking at, we were told in December that this would be these units would be on site in March, but it wasn't until June that we learned about the rest of the delays. And Patrick, Mr. Florence, I think it has a sense of the urgency and how the pieces are going to come together. But I certainly, as a board, we need to know if anything is stopping this, and if anything is stopping this. And that's all, because we have a school that's desperate to have these trailers in place before school starts.
And let me add one other thing too. In meeting with Corley Redfoot, we have a reporting structure we're putting together right now that will distribute amongst the board over the summer as frequently as you like it. We've identified 12 major points that as we attain those steps or those goals, you'll be updated, and we can distribute this however. In addition, we certainly can have interim Zoom calls, but we've got a format we've developed so that we can track what's going on at any given moment.
All right. Any other questions? Let's see, Ms. Hauser, your hand is still up. Okay.
Yeah, I do. I have one more question, and that's for Mr. Florence. Are any of the other projects that we're doing with Corley Redfoot have the same critical time frames as this one?
This is the most critical.
Okay, so this gets timing priority. If
Absolutely.
other projects have to be delayed, they will be delayed for this. You have the wiggle room to do that and the authority to do that.
Absolutely, we do.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions from anyone? All right. Seeing none, this is for approval. Do we have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Okay, we have a motion from Ms. Hauser. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, a second from Dr. Moore. Let's see, Ms. Doyle,
Yes.
Ms. Hauser,
Yes.
Dr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Richmond.
Yes, I think your second was from Ms. Purcell also.
Oh, was it? Okay, I'll fix that. The second was from Ms. Purcell. All right, Ms. Smiley.
Yes.
Okay, and Ms. Purcell. Ms. Purcell, can you hear us? I cannot hear you.
Yes.
Okay, yes, there we go. All right, and chair votes yes. Motion carries. The next item is the contract for purchase of real property 1001 Corporate Drive.
So I'll go ahead and start this. So again, as part of the process of reviewing and looking at future needs and future school facilities, the Orange County School does not have any land banked or any property that is reserved for the future needs of the district. What we currently have as far as our campuses, school sites, administrative buildings, and land is currently in use. And so there was an opportunity that presented itself at 1001 Corporate Drive that is adjacent to the Welcome Center for the district. We have that existing property at 5.58 acres. This 11-acre property from Duke Health came on the market earlier this spring. And looking at the project, Patrick Florence done some legwork and reviewed this potential site for us. And we recommended to the board in closed session that we negotiate and pursue purchasing this property. This does require a Board of County Commissioners approval, and we have identified future educational programming that could be utilized if this project was purchased by the Orange County Schools, including the possibility of a future establishment of a K-8 school, relocation and expansion of Partnership Academy, including middle school programming, expansion of trade or certificate career education programs, swing space for educational use in order to renovate or improve older facilities, or transitional alternate classroom space for specialized programs. So there's a number of educational uses that this space could present itself for future use. This project or this site is already zoned OI, which is office institutional, which does include educational programming or school use. Patrick is obviously still with us here, so if you have any additional questions about the property or the assets on the property, he may be best to answer any of those questions.
Yeah, I would like to add that infrastructure is already in place, and there are a wide variety of uses that we've discussed. And also, there's virtually no land available of that size in this price range. It's in the path of growth, so I think it's a real opportunity. In these conversations with Duke Real Estate, they do have a commitment to communities, and the head of Duke Real Estate has a passion for public schools. So they are really giving us opportunity to pick up a great asset at a very reasonable price.
And speaking of the price, the market listing for this property was 4.5 million. We've offered and received acceptance, obviously pending approval at 2.8 million. And so, you know, the district would be purchasing the property well below the market ask of the property of the asset. And we've identified existing older facility monies within the capital plan for projects that would have already been completed or projects that would be incorporated into future facility work. For that funding, we have submitted that to the Board of County Commissioners, and none of the funding that we're requesting at the 2.8 million impacts any currently identified or approved project that we have indicated for the schools. And then because we currently have on hand approximately $43 million of capital funding, and the majority of that is for older school renovations and improvements. And so the closing out of old projects that came in under budget, projects that were identified but later decided were not feasible projects or projects to be done. Again, there was money allocated, and so we would be rebalancing the capital funding, which the board has done several times over the last 7 years in order to free up or to reappropriate for other projects that have come up over time.
May I ask a question?
Go ahead, Ann.
Has there
Been a site plan done on this to look at terrain, to look at road access, possible building? Has any of that work been done?
So
Yeah,
I'll let Patrick answer the second part. We had already, as part of what we were mentioning, the capital projects approved for Corley Redfoot in December. They already were doing or asked to do a site evaluation of the existing 5.5 acres on Corporate Drive. And so they were already familiar and they worked on and were part of the purchase and renovations of our existing property and are already familiar with that area. But Patrick can talk a little bit more about the actual 11.1 acre site.
Yeah, we've worked with Corley Redfoot, and they're getting an ALTA endorsed survey, land survey for the full 11.1 acres. And in conjunction with that, they're also completing a phase 1 environmental study. And we should have that within a couple of weeks. But if there's any unknowns, that will uncover them in both cases. And it'll also give Corley Redfoot the legwork, the field notes to go ahead and pursue other options as we direct them which direction we would like to go. And we can also ask them to come back with what they feel is most feasible.
Well, would it not be
Wise to wait until we get the survey and get that report from Corley Redfoot to decide then if we're going to make a purchase? I just hate to spend that much money on something that we're not going to be able to use as a school.
Well, the issue is time, and virtually no approving authority is going to be available. And if that happens, then Duke will probably take it on to the next buyer. And within the scope of work that we had proposed to Corley Redfoot. We've already identified some projects that we don't need them to complete. And in fact, we did a reconciliation in the past week of money saved or monies that can be allocated to other capital projects. So the funds are there. We're just spending on this rather than some other project that we're able to not have to renovate or study.
And this is Neil, just to add the purchase contract, which our firm drafted, does have a standard due diligence provision in it. So, and I understand that work has been ongoing. I don't know if either of the Patricks can update on the status there, but we've had a site access agreement that has allowed Orange County Schools and its contractors to inspect the site pending closure on the contract. So there has been some due diligence work that's been ongoing.
And Duke is completing some of their own due diligence apart from what we're doing. Met with one of their middle managers on site middle of last week, and they detected an old oil tank in the ground. There was no alarm, but they are having the soil tested to confirm that there are no remediation issues. And were they to detect or find something, then we would get all of our costs back. But they're as anxious or eager to sell as we are, hopefully we are to buy.
Okay, okay. Thank you, Patrick.
All right, I saw Ms. Hauser's hand up next.
Yeah, thank you. I'm curious about the valuation and where we came up with the price. And I appreciate you including the tax value, because the tax value of the property is about 2.3 million. And of that, almost $1 million of it is buildings that I'm not sure we can use. So the land value is actually about 1.3 million. And then to Ann's question, it's a very hilly property. So I don't know how much money we would have to invest in site prep to make it usable for any of these schools. So just curious where the numbers came from. Our numbers.
So you're correct. I mean, you have a couple already in hand. We also looked at the valuation in the property that was already purchased, the 5.53 acres that Orange County Schools spent $3 million for when the Welcome Center was purchased, not including an additional $1 million for site renovations to half the property. And so by the time we complete renovations on the existing property, we'll have spent over $5 million on the Welcome Center for 5.5 acres. Now, granted, the site work and the construction that was done for the old charter school on that property is going to be very similar to what was done or could be done for the site work on the 11.1 acres. You are correct. It is a hilly terrain, but it is not something that presents itself of having all 11 acres unusable or disconnected. Certainly you could anticipate that whatever is built or located there will have multiple levels, including our existing property does between the two buildings on the 5.5 acres.
So just so you're saying that what we spent for the Welcome Center property was used, a smaller property was used as a comp for this one?
That's correct. It is adjacent property. It's exactly what would be used for a market analysis.
Okay.
Andre?
Yes. Mr. Obley, I appreciate all the work you and Mr. Florence have done in this. And I just had one question. I know you mentioned that this property could be a place where Partnership Academy could build a school. And I know they had looked at the Welcome Center being a location. And what was the reasoning why that place or that location wasn't able to be used as Partnership School?
Yeah, the current existing building, the plan was the second building, building 2 in the back that has the gymnasium, to be the Partnership building on site. we did an analysis of that, and I'm happy to forward that back to the board. I think we presented that about a year ago, that showed when you take the existing partnership building on Story Lane and you match up the profile to the existing gym building, the space is very similar. You gain the gymnasium, but because of the class size and the spaces in the back building, you really don't have the space to drop in the Partnership Academy with the number of classrooms, plus the administrative areas, et cetera, wouldn't be in that back building. And so it would require additional renovations. And that's why we asked for Corley Redfoot to do the assessment of that, the existing Welcome Center property and the Story Lane property, to see what the best future use or best direction the board may want to go in as far as Partnership Academy, whether it's leaving it on the existing site on Story Lane. We have presented as part of that proposal last year some concept drawings on how we could expand and add a cafeteria, a gymnasium or multi-purpose building, a connector to that on the existing property. And then again, whether you want to renovate and add. And to date, again, there's not been any renovations done to the back building since we took possession of it. The front building was completed, but the back building would still need extensive renovations, and it's not grandfathered anymore, so it would have to come up to all new codes and requirements if we were going to open up any portion of that campus back up to being a school site again. I hope that answers your question. Again, I'm more than happy to forward out to the board, that assessment that was done comparing the two properties. Now you add in this new property at 11.1 acres. I think it just gives more ability with that flexibility for partnership expansion, or as we mentioned, additional things that could go on the sites.
I appreciate it. I just knew, I thought I remember at one point that there was also an issue, like it was mentioned earlier, because it was on that hilly location. There would have to be some parking lot extensions added, and that would be an issue. And so I started thinking, well, with that other piece of property, will we run into that same ordeal? And so that's why I asked that question.
Yeah, that's certainly wherever we build impervious surface, parking lots, if it's school use, buses, that was another issue we were looking at with the existing Welcome Center building, was just the buses and turning buses around the property or site. Now, the good thing about the 11.1 acres is because it's a cul-de-sac and connecting between all property owned at the end of that. If we purchase this with Orange County Schools, that does give us more options for turnaround or for traffic at the end of that roadway, because we would be the property owner on both properties.
Okay, Ms. Hauser?
Yeah, just so I guess, and Patrick, you mentioned the concept plan we already have for partnership. I thought that was pretty solid. Is there any reason that we would abandon that for this? I mean,
it's part of the evaluation. I mean, the only approval we had was to move forward with that just for that site assessment, and that's part of the original work we had already asked Corley Redfoot to do on the 5.53 acres. I think it was in a consensus of the board, not by vote, but certainly by comments when we presented those concept maps, that something needed to be done for partnership for the future of the district. And so part of the first step was, let's look at the existing buildings. Again, we reviewed profile to profile, but that's not from a construction or from a school design standpoint, which is why we asked at that time to bring in Corley Redfoot, because they'd already done the building assessments for the renovations that were to be done. And when the property was purchased, to bring them in, because they were already familiar with the site and the property, to bring them in to look at the Welcome Center, but then to go ahead and assess the Story Lane property as well.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Smiley?
So the partnership piece, does this new site offer more? I know one thing that has been floated is, should there be also middle school for partnership? And I know there's obviously students on a waiting list right now. I think there's more demand than the school can allow. And I feel like I remember that Story Lane plan had like a gym and a cafeteria and some of those things, but maybe not significantly impacting the number of students who could attend. Would this site, I imagine, offer that as a possibility? We would have more flexibility in terms of sort of the size of the facility and things like that.
I think actually both, because with the Story Lane property, because we own so much of the property that's undeveloped over there, including to where the little house is, where we have the extension of our transportation information system folks over there. I think either really could answer that question. You could either add what we had mentioned, cafeteria, multipurpose room, connector, outdoor lab, et cetera, for partnership, but also, additional classrooms would be a possibility on that site. Or if you do the other, you bring it over to the Welcome Center, then you have some classrooms that would need to be renovated, but you don't have all the administrative office, cafeteria, et cetera, that would need to be added as well. So, but I think to answer your question, both properties could be a possibility. Now you add in the 11.1 acres, it adds just another.
That's the one I really meant. Yeah, on that site.
It adds another layer of future use. There is one, obviously there's an old building on the existing property, and Patrick can talk more about the assets. We would have no recommended use for that at this time. Certainly it could be looked at. One option would be, public sale of that and have it relocated or removed. There is a barn there that certainly reclaimed wood, we feel like would have market value for someone. And then there is what was the hospice. There's a building there, and that building actually is in fairly good shape that we would certainly could be first use if we need an expansion of an area, and go ahead and use some existing area on that property. And Patrick can probably talk more about what else is on that site.
Yeah, I'd like to add that the existing hospice location is configured into a suite arrangement. So there's a possibility to put at-risk students there that may need to be separated for a period of time. It would make very good, adequate space to renovate offices. There's any number of uses. And the large house itself, there is a possibility that could be sold at public auction as well. Though I think for the first 3 to 5 years, we certainly could use that as swing space for staff when we renovate, say, the Board of Education office. We've got the generator already approved, and installing that generator, we found some corrections we really need to get within that building. And in order to do that, we're going to have to keep the administrative function going, but the staff would not be able to be there during some of that. So there's any number of options with those two spaces.
All right, Ms. Stoll?
Thank you. Yes, I wanted to raise what was mentioned in the materials, that it does have the advantage of having all the utilities in place, since it's been, there might be some extended areas of the site with the hill that is not fully assessed, but there are some like ready to use advantages of the utilities. So what more do we know about the utilities for that site?
We obtained records, the past 2-year records of utilities of phone, electric, water, and they seem to be in line. They were averaging, I think, about $1,000 to $1,200 a month for everything within the structure. But what we also found is, as a matter of operating principle, Duke keeps all their facilities licensed. Even if they're shuttered, they keep them licensed so that they're compliant with Joint Commission. and that enables them to bring them back online very quickly if they need to. So it's in theory, it's an operating facility right now. So we've got information. If you know anything about Joint Commission, their reviews and accreditation process is very stringent. So in order to pass that, it's got to be a sound facility.
All right, are there any other questions? All right, the only other thing I would just bring up, just to make sure everybody is aware, is this would just move us towards requesting the county commissioners to repurpose capital funds to do this. So this does not in any way just immediately approve this. So I just wanted to share that next step with the full board of what would happen after this. If approved tonight, it would go to the county commissioners to review the proposal of changing capital to do this.
And Mr. Atherton, this is Neil. That's correct. And I would actually ask that the motion, if there is one to approve this contract, specifically states that the approval is contingent on county commissioner approval. And also it would be good if the minutes would reflect the board understands that the contract cannot be signed unless and until the commissioners approve the contract. That's actually a specific statutory requirement. So not only is commissioner approval required, we wouldn't even sign it unless and until the commissioners do approve.
Are we ready for that motion now?
If that is what the board would like to do.
I saw Bonnie had her hand up.
Well, I was just gonna let the board know that, and I have to be careful because I'm commenting, you know, all my comments are designed for management discussion, and I really do appreciate the work of the staff on this project and on the Eflin one. If this motion goes, if a motion is raised, I will be voting against it. And part of the reason, so just to compare Story Lane versus this, is that we own the Story Lane property. It's ready to go. This is another $5 million, which we could be using to build out Story Lane rather than buy more land. And the bigger issue to me is that the county is spending $1 million of taxpayer money on a facilities plan for us, which is going to give us a list of prioritized projects and how to move forward. And I think we should be waiting on any major purchases like this, undefined, you know, purchases until we've heard the results of that project. So, but I'm just letting you know that I'll be voting against this.
All right, Ms. Smiley?
Okay, that actually did raise one more question for me, which is if, let's say we moved forward with this purchase and then per Bonnie's point, it doesn't fit into our long-term plan or something like that, would the board still be able to sell the property at market value and then use those funds for other projects?
I'll defer to Neil, but my understanding is if the county approved this, if we purchased it, the county gets first rights to the property to pay at market value. If they decline, then we would be allowed to sell at whatever value we can get. But I'll let Neil comment on that.
No, that's exactly right.
And the tax value is 2.3 million, which is less than what we're paying for it.
Yeah, that's correct.
All right, any other additional questions?
Well,
Yes.
just a point of clarification. Bonnie, a minute ago, you said 5 million is what we'd pay, but I thought our offer was 2.8 million.
Our offer is 2.8, and Patrick was saying that it was going to at least another $1 million in site prep and other expenses that we would incur if we want just to get ready to build. That was, I think, Patrick, the number you used, about $5 million to get the site ready to build.
That was on the existing property, 920 Corporate Drive, the back building. If we were going to continue, we've already with the purchase of that property, we've spent about $1 million on the renovations to date. And there would be approximately another $1 million needed to renovate the back building. So that's our existing corporate drive. We do not have any cost estimates as to site work, site plans, or the cost of future building on that site, the 11.1 acres at
So-
1001 corporate drive.
So just for clarity, Mr. Abilene, we would need to do that work, which would require us to also modify capital plans to do that as well.
That's correct. Any future building expansion renovations would require it to be part of the capital plan moving forward, for which funding would be allocated. It's not uncommon for school districts to have property that's purchased land bank that just sits. Sometimes that it just sits because there's no current use. Sometimes it sits because there's no funding to do anything on the property. So it would be an asset in inventory. Certainly there would be maintenance costs, landscaping, mowing, keeping the facilities existing from, falling into disrepair, et cetera, that we would upkeep on any property that we own. But there is no authorization to move forward with anything because it's not in the capital plan and there's not funding allocated to do any renovations or site work on that site.
So we would still have to maintain the utilities of the existing facility, essentially,
Absolutely.
and that would go to our operational costs.
It would. That's right. It would be part of our operational costs, landscape and mowing. I don't anticipate we would. We typically, the administrative buildings, we do not add that to our landscape services contract like the Murrays you just approved. Those are for school sites. So we would pick up internally within the maintenance department, the landscaping. But yes, we would be responsible for the upkeep. We would be responsible for, I think there's fire, life safety systems, obviously alarm systems, security systems, things of that nature. There probably would be minimal upgrades we would want to do to make sure it's tied into our existing equipment that we have on our properties as well, but that could be incorporated into our capital plan next year.
Yes, and when I think about site prep, I think about if we wanted to move ahead and build a school and to put a school, it's a breathtaking property actually, but it's very hilly, and putting a school on it it seems to me would take a substantial amount of site preparation. Would not be a couple $100,000.
All right, are there any other questions? Okay, how would the board like to proceed with this?
Well, I would go ahead and make a motion to authorize staff. Neil laid it all out to move forward. Neil, could you describe what exactly we'd be approving here?
Yeah, I think it would just be a motion to approve the proposed purchase of real property from Duke University, contingent on Board of County Commissioner approval of the purchase price.
Yes, that's my motion.
Can I add a modification? It's Duke Health, I believe, is the entity, not Duke
Thank you.
University.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and we have a second from the Stoll. Okay, Ms. Purcell? I cannot hear her. I'll come back. Ms. Hauser?
No,
Okay, Mr. Richmond?
No.
Okay, Ms. Smiley?
Yes.
Okay, Ms. Dole?
Yes.
Okay, Dr. Moore?
Yes.
Okay, let's see, Ms. Purcell, are you back on?
I came back. are you voting on the property?
Yes,
'Cause I missed that.
yes.
I'm gonna vote no at this time. I've got too many questions.
Okay. And let's see, Ms. Stoll?
I already voted yes.
Okay, thank you. And let's see, the chair votes no. That means the motion does not carry. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, the motion does not carry. All right, next item is the after-school program fee increase for the school year 2023 to 2024. Dr. Felder?
Yes, good evening, board. So tonight, I want to present a request to increase after-school program fees for the 2023-2024 school year. Just as a matter of background, as this has been shared with the board previously, fees for the elementary after-school program have not increased in over 5 years and will and remain well below the average cost of surrounding programs. In recent years, there's been no fee attached to the middle school after-school program as a result of a historic grant. And so the proposed fee scales for both elementary and middle school are outlined in Assembly. We also included the 3-year trend costs for the district to run middle school after school. Those funds are coming out of the after-school program.
All right, any questions from anybody around this? Mr. Richmond?
Yes, I do. So just wondering, I've been told that there was at least 200,000 of grant monies in our account for after school back in March. Do we still have that amount currently?
I cannot answer that question. I don't know.
I'm here, Dr.
Rhonda can
Felder.
speak to the
Mr.
amount
Richmond,
in the account.
for clarification, are you referring to basically what is in the term I would use is fund balance, i.e. savings, funds that have been collected and not expended associated with the grant? Is that what you're referring to, Mr. Richmond?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
That is correct. Those, when our books are closed this fiscal year, you will see those become part of fund balance and increase fund balance. So yes, they are still in the program. They are still designated as after school.
So I have a follow-up question to that, Ms. Rath. Didn't the board approve a reduced rate for the summer school program for this summer? I think it was, I don't remember the exact amount, but it was a reduced rate for this year. Has that already been accounted for in the 200K, or would that be reduced from the 200K?
That would be reduced.
Okay. Okay. All right, other questions from board members? Ms. Hauser?
Yeah, I really appreciated the comparison to other districts. I'm a little worried about the cost, because I don't think of Chapel Hill. I think we are a 50% free and reduced lunch district. Chapel Hill is about 25, I think. Durham, of course, is much higher, but their rates, at $56 a week, that's about $225 a month. If you assume 4 weeks in a month, it's a lot of money for families. So I'm just gonna throw that out there. It just makes me a little uncomfortable. Given, and I'll just add that, in Eflin, we ran a free after school program and we had a wait list, because we had a wait list for families. Because it, I don't know how to react. I'm just throwing that out there.
And thank you for bringing that up, Ms. Hauser. As I review what was in the abstract from the May 22nd meeting, the after-school program will continue to offer scholarships and assistance as needed and as requested. But what it has been determined is that we cannot continue. We have a grant now. That grant, as you heard, at Friday's special called meeting is slated to end. And so we can't always depend on grant funds. And we also will not continue to be able to support the program in the way that we need to without increasing fees, both at the elementary level and applying a fee to the middle school level. So these requests have a lot to do with being able to continue the program well beyond the grant period.
Ms. Doyle?
Thank you. Yes, I just know we've talked about this for a long time, and we've said that this is something we need to do this time of year so that families can plan in advance. I know we talked about this time last year. And so it just seems really timely that we raise these prices for elementary school and start charging for middle school. It just doesn't seem sustainable to continue it with without having more fees that can accommodate the costs.
All right. Any other comments or questions? Ms. Smiley? Oh, go ahead.
So with this increase, we essentially think we'll be sort of breaking even with our costs. Is that what this is setting us up to do, is essentially break even on costs in a world where we do not have the grant?
That is the goal, Ms. Smiley.
All right. Any
As
other
noted
questions?
in the, I'm sorry, Mr. Atherton, just to add on, Mrs. Smiley, I just want to elevate that the grant ends December 2023.
Okay. Ms. Hauser?
Yeah, I have just two questions. One is, are there other grants that we have access to that we should be applying for? And then the second question I have is, do we offer any academic support in after school?
So I will, what I can tell you is that the only grant that I'm aware of, and we certainly, Ms. Mathis is certainly looking into that for us, is one to expand after school, but expand it by way of either adding on more hours, so maybe ending at 7 o'clock, 7:30, or to begin a before school program that I think there would be some interest in. So that grant is earmarked to do that type of work only. And we are never sure if we apply for a grant, if we're going to receive the grant. And so depending on grant funds, entirely would be of concern. And then the second part of your question was regarding
Academics. Do we have other academic support?
So with regards to academics, my understanding is that there are limitations on how much academics can be infused into an after-school program. If you recall, I don't know how long ago it was, it may have been a year plus ago, that was something we were looking into. Can we make after school more academic focused? And while children certainly can learn through a variety of means, so even as they play, of course, they're learning. The response was that the state was very specific about that. They did not want do not want after school to be a extension of school. And so we have, yes, there is academics built in, but not to the degree of, I would say not to the degree that we would like. We've gone as far as we can with regards to academics, and stay within what's the required definition of after school per the state.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Ms. Purcell, were you trying to ask something earlier?
I was. I just like to reiterate what Carrie said. I think if we're gonna do something different with having parents pay, number one, for middle school, and then raising the tuition for elementary, now's the time to do it, because those parents need to plan. A lot of them do that for budget wise. I know that when I was at Orange Middle, and parents came in for the first time for after school, when we talked about the after school program and open house, they were very shocked to hear that they didn't have to pay. They were pleased, but they were also very shocked to hear that they didn't have to pay. So I think they certainly will understand the need. But I do think that we need to, if we're going to do this, we need to go ahead and get that out to them as soon as possible for their budgeting purposes.
Mrs. Purcell, I just wanted to mention that I understand parents continue to be shocked and pleased that they don't have to pay. Yeah.
All right, I just had two questions. I don't see any other hands raised. One, I wanted to confirm when the middle school after school would start. I know historically it was delayed by an amount of time where it caused parents to have to figure out what they're going to do for a few weeks to figure it out. So just curious how that would work. Let's see, I see Ms. Mathis has her hand up.
Good afternoon, everyone. I can answer that, and I want to piggyback on the question that Member Hauser asked. The preference is for middle school to not start the first day of school. That's a kind of a best practice across the after-school world, primarily because, number one, Orange County Schools uses current staff. They're going to be burnt out by Halloween to the core, and that's not good. So worst case, typically in my experience, it's been 30 days, but I think you can get away with 2 weeks from the first day of school. The teachers need time to plan. We need to get the kids registered. They need orientation. There's a lot of things that go into play. In the first day of school, they're not going to have time. And some of them are going to be working summer. It's not going to go well. They're going to be burnt out really quick. So my recommendation is 2 weeks for school. Ms. Hauser, to answer your question, I do have some ideas about how to get more academically focused in after school. We do currently now have iPads, carts. And I had talked to Mr. Miller before I retired about to get more literacy in after school. And so we can finish that conversation, especially with the funding we have, to get a certified teacher at all of the sites, looking at the money that we do have, and to help with some reading strategies for some of our struggling readers, as well as additional support and homework. The only thing is all the kids will have to it's a choice. You can't force it. So kind of to what Dr. Felder was alluding to is in after school in a licensed program, it's optional. You can't force every child to go through. You have to give them options. So that's the only caveat to that, is it has to be a choice for each child. But I think having literacy centers in each of the program would be a good idea to strengthen the academic base, especially literacy for our students, now that we have the devices, and then next get the training to coincide with the supplies that we now have, and kind of utilize that as long as we can.
All right. The other question I had is there a multi-child discount for parents? There used to be, where you pay the initial fee, and if you have multiple childs, it would decrease by, I don't know, $5, $10, something like that. Is that still true? It didn't show in any of the materials.
Yes, sir, it should be.
Okay. That's all the questions I had.
But to also share with some of the money that we do have with the grant, we are in the process, we're gonna have to kind of, as Rhonda would say, we kind of balance that budget with some of our parents, especially our DSS families who have been struggling, because that's what the money is for. And some bills have not been paid. So they have to be paid, and we need to make sure that that money is used for families that it was intended and designed for. So we do have some other work to do with the grant as far as getting those bills down for our DSS families, which has increased since last year.
All right, if there are no other questions, this is an action item. Do we have a motion to approve?
So move.
All right, I heard Andre, who would second?
Carrie.
Carrie, okay. We have Andre with the motion, Carrie with the second. Dr. Moore?
Yes.
Okay, Ms. Dole?
Yes.
Okay, Ms. Smiley?
Yes.
Mr. Richmond?
Yes.
Okay, Ms. Purcell?
Yes.
Ms. Hauser?
Yes.
And chair votes yes. Okay, motion passes. Thanks, everyone. Okay, now we're into the items that were pulled from the consent. The first one is policy 7406. Ms. Molly, you had requested to pull that, so I will turn it over to you for questions.
Great. That's the employee compensation one, right? Okay. So this is a new policy replacing another policy. One question I had is this a North Carolina School Boards Association policy? Is this, how was this policy created?
I can answer that. This is custom made. This replaces your old policy 7406, which was titled extra duty pay. And this is intended to be a more comprehensive policy that we developed with the policy committee to address all manner of employee compensation and fundamentally the requirement of board approval for each type of employee compensation.
Got it. Okay.
And Neil, I just want to add with staff input and discussion, because it's
Correct.
it took many meetings to go through that and get to where it's at.
Yes, Dr. Felder and Rhonda and Joyce all had lots of input into this policy as well as the policy committee.
Okay, great. I am always a little cautious about homegrown policies that the School Boards Association does not have, but this one seems like a very reasonable one. So that's good. Okay, section B is called use of state or federal funds for employee compensation. And the way that I'm reading this, it doesn't authorize staff to pay locally funded positions. It refers to like, and later in the policy is like, and locally funded positions should be paid sort of equivalently to state positions, but it doesn't authorize us to pay using local funds. So wanted to raise that as a possible area for revision. Oh, Neil, you're muted.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand the point. Could you repeat that?
So there's a section B. Let me actually pull up the actual policy. Just have my note on it here. Section B, use of state or federal funds for employee compensation. It essentially says the school system administration is authorized to pay the base salaries of employees from available state or federal funds, et cetera, but it does not say or local funds. Like it doesn't authorize the use of local funds for paying salaries.
Yes, I think the point there is no, the board approval is not required to use available state and federal funds to pay employees. When it comes to the use of local funds, we get into other sections of the policy, and basically board approval is required to use any local funds. So I think that's why you don't see locally funded positions addressed in that section. That section is limited to state and federal funding for employee compensation. So does that make sense? In other words, the policy does contemplate that many of your employees are paid from locally funded positions in whole or in part. but board approval is required for the local funding, whereas if a position were entirely funded by the state, then there is no requirement to get board approval to pay that state salary.
Where does it say that board approval is required for locally funded positions? I don't see that side of it. I see local supplements and yeah.
It is in section E, board approval is required for all forms of employee compensation. And again, it clear that the policy distinguishes among a lot of different forms of compensation. So if the board approves a schedule, a salary supplement or an across the board schedule for the use of local funds, then the administration can apply that schedule without needing to get specific board approval to pay it in a specific instance. So an example of that might be retention bonuses that the board has approved recently, or signing bonuses. You don't necessarily have to approve that on a list if you approved anyone who meets the criteria is eligible for the bonus. So I think that's addressed in section E. But yes, I think it's pretty clear in the policy that that employees can and are paid from local funds. It's just that the board needs to either approve it on an ad hoc basis for an individual employee or across the board for a stipend for a schedule.
So Sarah, are you asking to see a separate section, or even in that section, that local positions to be approved by the board? Is that what you're asking for, or just clarity of that?
Just some kind of clarity, right? So it might be clarity in the section about state and local funds saying or state and federal funds saying positions funded by local funds, whatever. I'm not sure where, but just somewhere.
Yeah,
it was funny to read the state and locally funded compensation and then something about local supplements. And I was like, wait, but what about local positions? What about locally funded teaching positions? So I don't know if that's solved by reordering the sections or putting a sentence somewhere, but I think that would be helpful.
Okay.
I guess I'm not quite clear on what the revisions would be made here. Are we asking for direction to revise the policy and bring it back to the board, send it back to policy committee? What would be your requested steps here, Sarah, so that we know how to handle it if there's a motion to be made there?
Yeah, I think maybe it is going back to, typically we do first read of policy as a discussion like this. And if board members have comments, if they're super easy to make, then it could just be made without going back to the policy committee. Will,
yeah,
what do you think?
I think I'm okay with the changes you're requesting, Sarah, because I think any clarity we can put in policy to make it easy, that there's no confusion. And I see what you mean is, when you read it and you see it says use of state or federal funds for employee compensation, it could just say use of state, federal, or local funds, and then there be another paragraph there that just says use of local funds for employees must get prior approval. It would be as simple as that. I don't think it's that complicated, unless you're thinking of something more elaborate, Sarah.
Yeah, no, if the detail of that approval is detailed in another section, that's fine. So maybe that's, yeah.
I like it.
I think it adds clarity. I think it's good.
I just want to make sure that adding that would not, how sometimes we add something requires board approval and inadvertently we've required this big process that creates speed bumps and delays for staff. I just want to make sure, because we typically, for example, we have typically large numbers of teaching positions, assistant principals, various whatevers, funded in local funds. So does this policy provide somewhere that we have a?
So Sarah, to answer what question I think you're asking is, this does not, putting that statement in there would not prohibit anything that we are currently doing. In fact, one of the discussions points we had was one thing that, Ms. Rath does quite frequently is we'll move a local position to state.
This is my concern, right? Is that we would put something in the way there.
We would not inhibit that. In fact, there's an item in there that talks about updating the board when that happens. So there was a conscious discussion about not requiring her to come to us
Okay.
by saving money for moving a position. So this would not, this just adds clarity when it starts with the locally funded position, that's what would happen is the board approval. But
Yeah.
I agree with you on the concern, and we had a long discussion about that to not inhibit our ability to save the district money or to optimize.
Yeah, so maybe if there were a sentence in that section that says something along the lines of many positions are also funded through local funds. The approval of paying local funds for employee compensation is covered in section F or whatever section it is or something like that.
That I follow. So you basically just because you're saying this section doesn't say anything about local funds, you want to cross-reference or something? So that,
Yes, that
so
it's
if
just,
someone looked
yeah.
there, they wouldn't say, what about local funds?
Right, and that we say,
I think
and we do fund some positions through local funds, and here's the info, see
Okay,
this
'cause I do
section.
think
for
it's
whoever.
all, it's all addressed in here, but if it's captions and heading and drawing the reader's attention to another part of the policy,
Yeah.
that I follow this.
Okay.
That we could work with that, but would the idea be to take it back to policy committee to vet the changes?
I think, Neil, I think this is pretty basic.
Simple.
I think if you modify it and then send it out to the full board for the second reading, if that doesn't suffice, then we can send it back to policy.
We could
I mean,
talk about it
no
at the
big deal.
second read, yeah.
Okay.
That's fine.
Yep.
Okay,
Okay, I can do that with the understanding that it's basically just inserting something in B that's not trying to address the rules on locally funded positions, but just to note where else in the policy they're addressed.
yes,
Acknowledge that they exist and point out other sections of the policy. Okay,
Yeah,
I'll
that
do
would
that.
be great.
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay. Then there is, I didn't write down what section this was in, but I wanted to know just a little bit more about what it means. So it's the board will be advised of planned and anticipated funding sources at the time of approval is sought for any type of employee compensation, and will be provided with quarterly updates on any net changes in funding sources used to pay each central office employee. It was that part will be provided with about the quarterly updates. I just didn't follow what that was.
So this is what I was referring to, Sarah, of how do we find out if something's been shifted? Because it is possible to shift some of the funding to state or other funding sources. And instead of saying, okay, you can't change anything until you bring it to the board, and that may take a couple of weeks or
Mhm.
whatever, this allows that to happen. And then we would get it in the form of a spreadsheet or something where we would be able to see that quickly, that the changes have been made or a funding source versus approval. It's an inform, not an approval.
Yep. Well, I agree with that. What is a net change in funding source? What does that mean?
So the intent, and I'll let anybody from the policy committee speak on this. My understanding of that is, say that this position is completely funded by local, and then you move that over to federal. Say that we found out Title II or some other title money that could be used, that we would get that as an update that had changed. But say if you're locally funded and no changes, then that wouldn't be a requirement to notice that specific position. But going local, but any shift from any of the funding sources would be that, hey, this has changed. Kind of thing.
Right, and I would just add, because this came up in policy committee, we originally started the language in the original draft was that any changes in the funding source would be reported to the board. Rhonda pointed out they're constantly in finance, that never going to leave a penny of state money on the table, right? So there's a lot of quick adjustments can be made, and the board doesn't necessarily want to be, or the policy committee didn't believe the board wanted to be notified of all of those. So that's hence the net change. It's just that, it's not, if you moved an employee from onto state funding, briefly because you could, that's good. You don't necessarily need to immediately update the board, but when we net it out over, the quarter,
Yeah.
the board would be informed of those changes over the financial quarter.
And just to add, it goes the other way too. So we have positions that were funded by Title I, And all of a sudden so we approve it one way, but then the funding source changes and the position might be partly local funded, partly Title I funded. So the amount of money doesn't change, but the way it's allocated by position does. So we're giving management discretion to do that.
Yeah, I
As
guess.
long as we can see it once a quarter.
Yeah, I guess just a reaction to that portion. I understand there was a larger discussion at the policy committee is, as a board member, I'd need so much additional context to even be able to understand what I was looking at there like each of those changes may come with other sets of explanation. And I do have some concern that that would become a time consuming yet low benefit effort for staff.
So Sarah, we did have an extensive conversation with staff on what is reasonable, and then the practicality part of this,
Mhm.
like because I'm with you. I was like, if you're changing this, I don't need to know about it like daily. But at the same token, all board members shared wanting to know the basics of the funding sources of items to know where we are. And again, I think that's managed through, a spreadsheet that we would get to see that, and that would get updated at some interval. But the intention is not to say, hey, I changed this week, I go update it. It would be, okay, in a quarter, here's a delta change, and we would get that. Or I would say we have access to it whenever you want to look at it, versus you have to have a set meeting or anything like that. We just wanted a way that you could get access to it at the same time. The expectation isn't that it's being updated hourly, daily, monthly.
Right.
So anyway, that was the most reasonable when asking. And I know, Rhonda, you're on the call. Do you have any comments around this? I mean, you were at the meeting as well.
I don't have anything further to add.
Okay.
Thanks, Rhonda.
Maybe we can just, as this begins, we can see what the board is doing with it, and what I'm having a hard time seeing, like how I would have any judgment about all that. But we can look and see. That's fine. Okay. Okay, then I think this is the last section. So then the section on stipends for extra duties, section F, there's a line, no work shall be performed prior to board approval. In general, in theory, I totally agree with that. I have two thoughts. One is, this is like bolded and underlined, and I just don't recall doing that in other policies. I feel like it's a little much. The text of the policy is, when we say something is required, it's required, I would like to take that out. And then the other thing is, I do have some concern. I think that that's what we should be going for. And I think that there will be exceptions. And I'm concerned that the policy doesn't include sort of anything about exceptions or an indication of what we might do if this does not happen. So, there are situations, we have certainly done TTCs or stipends and things because somebody was missed after the fact inadvertently, right? Or because, the principal or whoever didn't get it to staff in time, and that's not that person's fault, and the work started, and obviously the principal should have followed the protocol, but like sometimes that won't happen. So what will happen when that is the case, even if this is the expectation? Like, will we just not pay them even though they've started doing the work, or what? You know what I'm saying?
So one point I'll just make on that is that the policy does say that no work will be performed without board approval, but the board approval can be either on an individual basis for a specific employee or for a schedule. So one way to address this, and it's your policy, it's board's policy, so I'm not trying to debate you on this. I'm just pointing out for context that one way to address that concern would be if you were approving schedules, like here's what the board has approved for, an extra duty stipend for teachers who work during their planning periods. and it's a set amount, then in theory, I think those individuals could be paid that stipend and they could start the work and be paid because they're paid per schedule. What I think the policy language here is trying to prevent is somebody coming up with a stipend that has never been approved by the board previously, and the employee gets paid, works and gets paid, and then the board is asked to approve that stipend later. So again, you are correct that if there were not a previously approved schedule that would authorize a stipend payment, this language would say that person simply cannot be paid for the work until it's come to the board, which means you have to wait till next board meeting or schedule a special meeting to get that approval. That's not part of the schedule.
Okay, so the no work shall be performed prior to board approval. If the work was performed prior to board approval, you know, we had this person working on our master schedule and it just didn't get to the board before they had to start doing the work or whatever. What happens? Like, what happens then?
I think we'd address that on a case-by-case basis. I mean, the board may be asked to ratify if the work was done. I mean, I suppose the board could be asked to approve it after the fact. The point of the emphasis here is to put staff on notice that, don't.
They've got to really get, yeah, no, I get that. Yeah.
Get your ducks in a row and get the approvals required. That's also, I think, why in policy committee we ended up adding the bold and underline just to emphasize that point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just want to point out, Sarah, that the recommendation to bold it was the superintendent's, and everyone agreed with it because this has been an issue and concern, and making sure that everybody sees that as they're glancing over this policy. Originally, the way the policy was laid out, this no work shall be performed was in the steps, right? That you would get to step 4 before you realized, oh, I got to get board approval.
Yeah.
So that's why that was put in there that way, as a, hey, this is different. We want people to be able to see and know that that is the expectation. So just wanted to give you context because it was broadly discussed.
I appreciate that. I can't think of another place in our policies where we have something bolded and underlined like that. To me, that would be more of a educational opportunity rather than like forever and ever in the text of our policy, this is bold and underlined and literally nothing else is, so that would be, go ahead, Bonnie.
Part of it is because it's a change. That it's a change in the way we've been doing things.
Yep. Oh yeah, no, I mean, I get that. I certainly think that people will need to be notified and attention will need to be drawn to it. So I certainly get that. Maybe at some point we'll feel like we can take out the bolding and underlined and sort of make it more consistent with the rest of our policies.
I agree.
That was the last item I had for this policy.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Smiley. Ms. Stoll?
Yes, thank you. So just a quick question regarding why is like noticing what it says about athletic duties, stipends for athletic coaches. There are stipends for other positions too, like in the arts and things like that. And I'm just wondering why athletic coaches are mentioned, but other types of stipends that be in that category are not mentioned. Or am I wrong about how that would be categorized?
I think primarily because there are separate rules. This is carried over from your old policy 7406. There are separate rules about how often athletic coaches are paid. It's twice per sports season. So we just basically, this is preserving some of the original language from 7406, which is now expanded to include more than just, much more than athletic coaches, but we kept the specific provisions on athletic coaches from the old policy.
Okay. So does this seem adequate in that way for now, and something? I mean, I'm just wondering, do we need to include other groups, or is that where we would have, the board can come up with a schedule like is mentioned in the policy? So is it adequate to leave out other types of coaching stipends?
Well, some of the other things like for the arts were only, I think, were only like paid once a year or once a semester if it was done a semester. So we might need to put in there that there's a pay scale for other people who are coaching and put them all in there. That might be what you're asking, I think, that, and that way everybody's covered and it's not just coaches, athletic coaches.
So Neil, let me ask clarity on that. The way I understood it, and maybe this is where the clarity is needed, is we approve a schedule, and that schedule is paid out as defined by that pay schedule, except for the cases of like coaches. So if you happen to be the art teacher and your schedule's X dollars, you would get paid immediately. But if you were, I don't know, a football coach, you would fall under this other rule, which says you would get paid twice a season. So do we need to explicitly say, as specified by the schedule, or have the different areas broken out, or what's your recommendation around this?
Well, I'm not sure I'm completely following. I mean, again, what we have here is not new. It's from your old policy. And I don't recall specific discussion in policy committee, not a lot of detailed discussion about this section. I think we just sort of, the focus was more on being clear across the board in all forms of employee compensation. So I guess you could expand this out if you wanted to specifically address in policy how other stipends are paid, how frequently they're paid. For example, this just happened to be in the old policy. Nobody seemed to have an issue with it, so it's still here. You could take it out and you could just say that's part of the schedule. We approve a schedule for athletic coaches. The schedule itself will say how often it's to be paid. So we don't need the policy language. That would be okay, I think. And as for whether there's a practical need to address other types of positions beyond coaches, I'll defer to staff or board members on that. I don't know the logistical issues that might arise. But I guess if I heard you right, Mr. Atherton, all of this could be addressed in a schedule. How often you pay any employee in any earning any type of stipend is paid by a schedule. That could be addressed in the schedule itself as opposed to in policy, or it could be in policy, which means the schedule just has to conform with the policy. I think that's really up to you all.
Yes, Neil. I don't have a preference on this personally, so I was just seeing if you had any advice for us on which way would be better for us to handle or manage it.
I guess I don't really have a specific recommendation on this. I mean, if this has been the longstanding practice for athletic coaches and it's working and you want to keep it in policy and make that the rule, then I think you can just leave it as is and we've got everything else covered. If there's a need to be more specific on the frequency of stipend payments for other types of positions, you could take that up as a policy issue. We did not discuss that in that level of detail with policy committee. And then the final option would be, I suppose you could just probably delete all of section G and just, and then a stipend for an athletic coach would just be another stipend subject to the general rules for stipends. We wouldn't have a policy provision about step increases, about twice per year payments. That would just be addressed in the schedule itself. I think any of those options are really fine.
All right. Is there a preference from anyone on how to address that, or if there's a need to address it? So hearing none, I'll assume we'll be okay with going forward with the current version, and if there are changes needed, it can always come back, of course. All right, any other questions about this policy? Okay, we will need approval of first reading with the recommended changes that Ms. Smiley had.
Motion to approve on first reading with the recommended changes.
Okay, we have a motion from Ms. Smiley. Do we have a second?
Second,
Second from Ms. Hauser. All right, Ms. Stoll.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Richmond,
Yes.
Dr. Moore.
Yes.
Okay, Ms. Purcell.
Yes.
Okay, and Ms. Hauser,
yes.
Ms. Smiley.
Yes.
Okay, and chair votes yes. Motion carries. Thank you, everyone. Next, we have the drones policy. Ms. Smiley, you had requested that, so I'll turn it over to you.
Yes, the drones policy. My question here was, is this a North Carolina School Board Association policy?
And this is, it's close, but this is modeled more closely after the Wake County Public School System policy that was staff's recommendation, Mr. Abeles in particular, because it's a bit more detailed than the NCSBA policy, although they're both very similar because my colleague Rod Malone had a lot of input into the NCSBA policy. So it's similar, but a little bit different.
Okay, I remembered that NCSBA had one. Okay, so the difference is that this one is a bit more detailed.
That's what I recall. I don't remember the specific details. I know Mr. Abeles preferred it for several reasons, and we did a document compare for the policy committee to give those two as starting point options, and ended up going with the Wake version.
Okay. Just one thing to be aware of is when we have a sort of slightly modified version of a policy that NCSBA has, it leads to this, when they do updates to their policy book, it's a little bit more complex to sort of integrate it, which you all probably talked about in the policy committee.
Indeed. No, it's a great point, and we talked about that, and that's something that I do periodically like to remind staff and policy committee and board members of, that the more you deviate from the NCSBA, I mean, your policies should be your policies. So I don't think you should ever feel, well, we're hamstrung, we just have to adopt policies that are drafted for us at NCSBA. On the other hand, the more you deviate, the harder it is to keep track of the updates. So that's just a fact of life.
Okay. That is all that I wanted to say about that. Thanks.
Okay. All right, this policy is up for first reading. Do we have a motion to approve for first reading?
Motion to approve.
All right, we have a motion from Ms. Purcell. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, Mr. Richmond. All right, Ms. Hauser,
Yes.
okay, Dr. Moore,
Yes.
okay, Ms. Purcell,
Yes.
okay, Mr. Richmond,
Yes.
okay, Ms. Smiley,
Yes.
okay, Ms. Dole,
Yes.
and chair votes yes. All right, the next one you have is the facility usage fee schedule. Ms. Hauser, you had requested to pull it.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions. Let me start with the ones in the weeds. Soccer field, tennis court, and track. Do we charge for those today?
We charge based on the approved fee schedule that the Board of Education approved last year. So if it's on the fee schedule, we would charge for those usages.
Okay, so is the soccer field, tennis court, or track on last year's schedule?
I believe the soccer fields are not. Tennis courts, I believe, were.
Okay, we don't know, because people I know that are using the tennis courts are not paying for it. And people I know that use the tracks all the time are not paying for it. So I have some hesitance to ask Orange County taxpayers to pay to use facilities that they paid for. So
Part of the issue is we've had a fee schedule. Now there is unauthorized use that occurs continually on the property. And so there's two issues. One is, are individuals following the proper processes and procedures for utilizing school facilities? And two, if they're utilizing school facilities, is there a charge or not a charge based on policy? And even the Orange County Parks and Recreation, because I had that question raised about tennis courts, charges for tennis courts usage as well to residents, because that was also mentioned that there is no charge, but there actually is. The county lists a fee schedule. I believe it's $5 per hour for the use of tennis courts as well.
As opposed to $100 per hour.
Correct.
You know, so I am not in, just put it out there, I'm not in favor. I'm really okay if we wanted to say the facilities are for the use of Orange County residents, as opposed to anybody. But and same thing with the soccer field. I don't know how much use we get of those, but the tracks, I know people go on weekends, if they're not being used, people walk on the tracks all the time. And I like that. I actually think that's a wonderful thing. So that's okay.
So I will say, in committee, we did talk about fee schedules. There was both the current fee schedule and the current fee schedule that was discussed. We have looked at surrounding districts as well. But as far as the fee schedule, that's totally the decision of the Board of Education to charge or not charge and to assign the appropriate charges for facilities. Do know there is a liability and a risk, and I'm sure the attorney can advise the board that when facilities are opened and you're allowing the public to use them, there's a liability and a risk. There's also capital upkeep to those. And even, you mentioned the tennis courts. We're finding that folks are, wanting to convert those to pickleball courts on the weekends, and that's really not what they were designed for. So, anytime there's public use of facilities, there has to be management, there has to be oversight, and there has to be a review of those facilities being used. And there is times that the public does conflict with school use of the facilities.
Okay, these are all outdoor facilities, right? Tennis courts, soccer fields, track, these are all outdoor facilities, am I correct?
They are.
Okay, so and we could put a sign up that says use at your own risk. Right?
There's actually, I would just say there is a statutory immunity. It's not, no immunity is perfect and 100% guaranteed, but there is some protection for liability on the board's behalf for community use of outdoor school facilities. But, that said, all it takes is a serious injury and an enterprising lawyer to find a way to argue around it. So I'm not disputing Mr. Albley's point.
Okay, so I'm not in favor of it. I'll just say that. So I don't know, it's up to the board, but I would prefer those were not on the facility fee schedule. And then as far as the fees themselves, I was wondering if we could run the numbers for some of our people, some of the organizations that actually use the facilities. One that comes to mind is Orange Community Players. And how this works. I know we just approved them to use Cedar Ridge for their play this summer, and I was just curious what their invoice might look like. And then I don't know, like for some of the churches that use our facilities, what does this do to their invoices? And I'm particularly curious about fees for tables and chairs. So I didn't know if those did we always charge for that?
So again, whatever the previously approved fee schedule was, then we charge for it. It's on our website, and schools certainly have tables and chairs that are used, damaged, have to be replaced. And so that is the purpose of the facility fees, is to cover that. It also covers custodial or maintenance for setting up or breaking down when they have to deliver or pick up or move furniture requests for the use of the school facilities.
Okay, so I would like to see us, and I don't know if there's any other smaller groups that might use a meeting room or, or classroom. But I would just really like, I just picked the two, a church that's using our facilities and Orange Community Players, but I'd love to run an invoice for them before I'm willing to approve a fee schedule.
I believe we provided that analysis to the board when that came up for their waiver the last time.
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
same thing. Thank you.
So one of the changes to the approved policy was to create the two additional classifications in the fee schedule that are listed in red for the nonprofit organizations benefiting schools and the nonprofit organizations serving school-age children. So those two are the new areas that were added here. And this was based on the request of trying to not do an MOU for the organizations that have been frequently using the Orange County facilities. So, so right now we have a policy approved that has no fee schedule that matches. And I hear what your request is, Ms. Hauser, and I think definitely we can bring back that analysis, but right now we have a policy that has no fee schedule assigned to it. And the board can approve a fee schedule at any time.
Don't we have an old fee schedule?
But it does not include the two areas that include what the Orange County Players, for example, that you brought up, doesn't fall under the existing fee schedule.
Right, so I would think I mean, I'm looking at, I'm a little concerned about things like $50 per day. I'm sorry, $35 an hour for the stage spotlights. And, you know, just some of these, and again, the chairs and tables. So I'd like to understand how we are impacting our users. And maybe it doesn't matter, but I know there are churches that use our schools for their weekly services, and I would like to, and they would fall under the other nonprofit 501c3. I'm curious as to how this affects them. So I think it should be pretty easy to run the numbers. I don't know how long would, that's something we can get in before our next meeting on the 26th.
I think we've thoroughly evaluated the fee schedules in policy committee. This has been reviewed at several meetings. I'm unfamiliar with this new request. Certainly, I don't know how long it's going to take. I would imagine it would take more than 2 hours. So I'll wait further direction.
So, well, so let me just ask it differently. So we do have a request in to utilize the facilities. Has that request been given an estimate of their cost?
No.
Yes, they have, based on the previous fee schedule. And that was one of the issues, is without approval of this new fee schedule with the categories, the staff is required by policy to charge the last fee schedule approved by the board.
So Bonnie,
I just know that Orange Community Players, for example, has not received an invoice for this year. They've been just approved, which I appreciate, but they've not seen an invoice. So we can go by last year, but that's not what the question on the table is. The question on the table is, will this new fee schedule keep them whole? Because I don't want to go do it and then go back. And then again, separately, I'm just, you know, soccer fields, tennis courts, and tracks having fees for that. Really?
I believe those have been on the fee schedules for the Orange County schools for many years. We didn't add those my time in operations. So I think we'd have to do some research on how many years that's been on the schedule. As far as the Orange Community Players, again, we invoice afterwards when an application comes in. We evaluate what the request is and what the fee schedule is, and we give them some anticipated costs as we've done previously. But we don't invoice for them to pay until after the event. But I would defer to staff and the communication, because there's obviously communications with Orange Players that the folks who are processing applications must not have.
So board, to move this along, I would recommend we approve the fee schedule so the players and others could actually get an estimate and us to be able to evaluate that. If we don't approve it, then there is no fee schedule and it will become to us for a exception, which is one of the things we're trying to avoid. Now, if for some reason this, which was solely focused on trying to address that, does not produce that outcome, then obviously it can come back to the full board to adjust if needed.
I have my hand up.
Oh, sorry, Sarah,
Can I
go
make a
ahead.
Motion to approve this fee schedule, please.
Yes, so we have a motion from Sarah.
Second.
Who was the second? Sorry.
This is Jennifer.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Moore. Second. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Mr. Richmond?
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Moore?
Yes.
Ms. Smiley?
Yes.
Ms. Purcell?
Yes.
Okay, Ms. Hauser?
No,
Okay, Ms. Doyle?
Yes.
And chair votes yes. We have the facility usage policy or schedule has been approved. All right, with that, could we get a motion to return to closed session pursuant to prior stated reasons? Is
So
that
moved.
correct? Okay, we have a motion from Sarah. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second from Mr. Richmond. Ms. Smiley?
Yes.
Mr. Richmond?
Yes.
Ms. Hauser?
yes.
Ms. Doyle?
Yes.
Ms. Purcell? Ms. Purcell? Can't hear
Yes.
you. Okay, thank you. Dr. Moore?
Yes.
And chair votes yes. We are now moving back to closed session. I'll see y'all on the other call.
And Mr. Ellis,
May I ask a quick question, please, before we move on?
Yes, yes, Dr. Felder.
Yes, will we need to come back?
We will.
to adjourn the meeting, I was
We
just. gonna
will.
say
We'll have to come back to this to adjourn.
Correct.
Okay, all right. Staff just wanted to make you aware. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
All right, welcome back, board. Let's see. Do we have enough members to vote?
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Smiley for motion and Ms. Stoll for the second. All right, Mr. Richmond,
Yes.
Dr. Moore,
Yes.
Ms. Smiley,
Yes.
Ms. Purcell,
Yes.
Ms. Stoll,
Yes.
Ms. Hauser. Is she not on? Okay, we will pass her and chair votes yes. I call this meeting adjourned. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you all.
All right.